Imagine for a moment that the fate of the entire free world didn't hinge on some epic, decisive battle, but on a delivery service. Yeah, a non-stop, around-the-clock trucking route that was so audacious, so insane, it would completely rewrite the rulebook on modern war. You see, back in August of 1944, the German High Command wasn't just confident, they were almost laughing. They were looking at their maps, running their numbers, and they were mathematically certain that General George S. Patton's legendary Third Army was about to slam into a logistical brick wall and just stop, cold. They were absolutely sure of it. And this quote from General von Luttwitz really sums it up. This wasn't just wishful thinking. This was based on decades of military doctrine and their own horrible experiences on the Eastern Front. To them, the American advance wasn't just unlikely, it was physically impossible. The supply lines were just too long and the armies were consuming way too much, way too fast. Okay, so let's dive into this incredible story. We're going to look at the calculation that seemed impossible to solve. Then we'll see the wild solution they came up with, a literal highway to victory. We'll talk about the real heroes, the men behind the wheel. We'll break down the absolutely staggering numbers behind it all. And finally, we'll see how the legacy of this whole operation is still affecting us today.
First, you really have to put yourself in the Germans' shoes for a second. Their confidence wasn't arrogance, it was logic. It was based on the cold, hard physics of what it takes to keep a modern mechanized army moving. They had done the math, and the math was crystal clear.
So look at this. This is what's so fascinating. The Germans knew that a single armored division just drinks about 150,000 gallons of fuel a day. Patton had 12 of them, and they were now 400 miles from their supply dumps on the beaches, moving at an insane pace. So the German conclusion? Total paralysis. It was inevitable, probably within 48 hours. I mean, their math was perfect, but their assumptions about what the Americans could pull off, well, they were about to get a rude awakening.
So, how did the Allies respond to this impossible problem? Well, their solution wasn't just a plan. You could almost call it military heresy. It was this brute force, completely unorthodox answer that just spat in the face of every single rule in the German military textbook. They called it the Red Ball Express, and the concept was actually beautifully simple. The name itself, Red Ball, was an old railroad term. It meant one thing and one thing only. This shipment has absolute priority. Everything else gets out of the way. No excuses, no delays, no exceptions. And this is what was so brilliant and so completely baffling to the German commanders. 2 one-way highways running 24/7. But look at this, headlights on, at night, in a war zone. That's basically painting a giant bullseye on your back for enemy aircraft. Tightly packed convoys, no stopping. I mean, to a German officer, this looked like pure, undisciplined chaos. But it was chaos with a very clear purpose: relentless, unstoppable speed. So, a plan this crazy is just a piece of paper without the people tough enough to actually pull it off, which leads to the most important question. Who were these drivers? Who were the guys that turned this impossible idea into a reality that would win the war? And the answer is pretty remarkable. And frankly, it's a part of the story that doesn't get told nearly enough. Of the 23,000 drivers who were the absolute backbone of the Express, a staggering 75% of them were African American soldiers. Think about that. These men, serving in a segregated army, were quite literally the lifeblood fueling the liberation of Europe. And right here, this is the profound, almost heartbreaking irony of the Red Ball Express. These men were fighting for freedom for people in another country while being denied many of those same freedoms back home. With every single mile they drove, with every ton of supplies they delivered, they weren't just beating the German army. They were systematically demolishing Hitler's twisted theories on racial inferiority. And out of this, they built their own fierce culture, a brotherhood that was forged in pure exhaustion and grit. The slogans they painted on their trucks, Patton's Blood Bank, Detroit to Berlin Express, they weren't just jokes. They were declarations of pride and purpose. I mean, can you imagine driving for 48, sometimes 72 hours straight? They knew exactly what was on the line. Okay, let's talk about the numbers, because the sheer scale of this operation is where the German military mind just couldn't compute. This wasn't a war of tactics anymore. It was a war of production. It was an industrial tsunami. Just try to wrap your head around that number. 12,500 tons of fuel, ammo, and food delivered every single day. For perspective, that's like delivering the weight of 2 Eiffel Towers daily. In its first week, the Express moved nearly 90,000 tons.
Patton's advance never had to stop.
Now this is just mind-boggling. The Red Ball Express trucks themselves burned through 300,000 gallons of fuel every day just to operate. That number, that's more fuel than entire German armies were often given for all of their operations combined. Let that sink in. They were burning more gasoline just to move gasoline. It's insane.
This slide just nails the fundamental difference in thinking. You had the German doctrine of precision, of conserving every resource, of careful planning. And the American doctrine? Overwhelming volume, speed, improvisation. If a German truck broke down, a mechanic would carefully repair the broken part. If an American truck broke down, they'd just push it into a ditch, grab a new one, and keep on rolling.
You don't have to take my word for it. This quote from a German general who saw it with his own eyes says everything. They realized they weren't looking at a traditional military supply line. They were looking at a Detroit assembly line that stretched all the way across France, an unstoppable river of American industrial might. So, an 82-day logistics operation from 1944. Why does it still matter so much to us today? Well, because its impact went so far beyond just supplying an army. It sent shockwaves that genuinely helped reshape the world we're living in right now. First, there was the psychological effect. For German soldiers on the front lines, the constant, unending, 24/7 roar of truck engines was a form of torture. It was an audible reminder of the infinite resources being thrown at them. Ideologically, the incredible success of its majority black drivers was a massive refutation of Nazi propaganda. And for military planners everywhere, it proved a critical lesson. Logistics isn't just a support function, logistics is strategy. And here's where you see the long-term legacy so clearly. The undeniable competence and heroism of these drivers created this unstoppable pressure for social change. You can draw a direct line from their success to President Truman's order to desegregate the military in 1948. And beyond that, these veterans came home with world-class logistics skills. They founded trucking companies, and they literally helped build the modern American supply chain we all rely on every day. In the end, even the German High Command had to admit what had really happened. When it was all over, they confessed that the true weapon that had beaten them wasn't the Sherman tank or the B-17 bomber. It was the humble 2.5-ton truck. The German Supreme Commander in the West, von Rundstedt, he saw it. He understood the massive shift that had just happened. He realized they weren't just being outfought, they were being outproduced and outsupplied by a system that made their old way of war completely obsolete. It was like they were playing checkers, and the Americans had just invented a whole new game.
Which really brings us to the final perfect question that sums this all up. It's a question a captured German officer reportedly asked his American captors as he just sat there watching convoy after convoy after convoy roll past. It captures the pure shock of facing an industrial superpower. He just asked, how do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?
And the answer, of course, was roaring right there in front of him. In the industrial age of war, victory doesn't always go to the bravest soldier or the most brilliant general. It goes to the nation that can deliver the most, the fastest, the farthest. And for 82 crucial days in 1944, that weapon was the Red Ball Express.